Welcome to this session on secure best practices in the public cloud. My name is Dwayne Natwick. I am based out of Commerce Township, Michigan in the USA. I spend my time as an author, trainer, and product manager that has over 30 years of experience in the IT industry. I have multiple certifications, including my CISSP, PMP, and multiple role-based Azure certifications. I am also a Microsoft certified trainer and a regional lead for that program. You can find me on the social media links that are on the slide. In this session, we'll be addressing the many data challenges to an organization for maintaining security and keeping data accessible. We will talk about what should be accounted for to keep data accessible and available, and options within a public cloud to accomplish maintaining the availability of data when it is needed. We will go into the key points for data confidentiality, integrity, and compliance, and discuss the public cloud services that can be used to protect data. And finally, we will put this all together to deliver a secure and accessible data environment to users. Let's set the foundation by going through the challenges that an organization faces for data protection. When an organization is building a security program to protect their users and information, they must take into account the two primary threats, internal and external. Internal threats are from inside of the organization, while external threats are bad actors that are attempting to access something from outside the organization. Improperly identifying and addressing internal and external threats can leave organizational data at risk. And this can lead to data being exposed, compromised, and even lost, having negative effects on the organization both financially and, in the case of public companies, regulatory and reputational damage. There are layers of protection to take into account within a technology infrastructure. This is known as defense in depth. And there are typically 7 layers to build a security program and protect organizational data. These layers are physical security, which includes building security such as exterior fences, concrete barriers, and doors. And in an Azure or public cloud ecosystem, the cloud provider is responsible for this. Identity and access is properly designing user, group, and resource access that makes sure that access provided is only what is needed to get the job done. Perimeter security layer includes the firewall with port rules and access control lists that protect what transmits inbound and outbound in your network. Network security builds upon the perimeter security by segmenting your network with multiple virtual networks. Compute security includes hardening of the host and hypervisor, which is the responsibility of the cloud provider in a public hosting scenario, and operating system hardening and building a secure virtual machine baseline. At the application layer, it is important to make sure that proper security is in place for APIs and that there are no developer backdoors left open before an application is put into production. If an application is accessing a database, that connection should be configured with proper roles and only allow internal connections. And then at the center of all this is the data, which is ultimately what we're trying to protect as an organization. The last line of defense here is to make sure that all data is encrypted at rest and in transit, that data is properly classified for role-based access, and that all encryption keys are protected and accessible when needed. All of these layers should be continuously monitored for confidentiality, integrity, and availability, along with adherence to best practices and control effectiveness. When thinking about security, it can be related to your house. The functional use of a house is to protect your family and your possessions. In a technology infrastructure, your family is the users and the possessions is the data that belongs to the organization. Each layer of home or cybersecurity is another area of protection for these possessions. The more layers that you have, the more difficult it is for threats to gain access and compromise the sanctity of your home. As we talk about data protection within a public cloud environment, shared responsibility within a cloud environment is extremely important to understand. Shared responsibility provides the guidelines of where Microsoft Azure responsibility ends and an organization's responsibility begins. This responsibility is different among the cloud delivery models. And looking at the graphic, organizational responsibility and infrastructure control are a direct correlation when moving from infrastructure, platform, or software as a service models. Even though the graphic shows organizational responsibility, it does not mean that Azure does not have the ability to provide services for an organization to maintain security and compliance. In many cases, there are services available that need intervention to turn on and configure. Data responsibility is an organization's responsibility across all models. However, Azure provides encryption at rest by default for storage accounts and encryption options for databases. For encryption in transit, the organization is required to configure HTTPS only to transmit using TLS. We will discuss these services as we proceed through this session. There are two contributors to the effectiveness of secure and accessible data within the cloud: users and organizations. Both have different perspectives of what they need and how it would be provided. The user perspective is that they need access to the information and tools when required in the simplest manner possible. The organization, however, is required to take into account the who, what, where, why, and how the users will access these resources while maintaining the confidentiality, integrity, and security of the organizational data. Let's talk about the importance of data accessibility and availability in the cloud. When accessing data within the cloud, the availability of that data when it is needed is extremely important, particularly to the user environment. Users want the flexibility to access this data potentially from multiple sources, and organizations must protect those sources from unauthorized access to data. The organization needs to ensure that the user that is attempting to access the data on a device is authorized to do so, and that a user only has the ability to access the data that is required for them to complete the tasks required for their role. Azure provides services and settings that can assist in the accessibility and availability of data in the cloud. We'll review these in the next few slides. Identity management is extremely important in the context of accessibility to data. Proper configuration for users, groups, and resources based on their roles help to decrease vulnerabilities that data will be exposed to someone that is unauthorized to view that data. Role-based access controls within Azure Active Directory domain services, and federated access services provide definition to what level of access will be provided to resources within Azure and the data that can be viewed. For an additional level of assurance, multi-factor authentication should be enabled for users to verify that they are who they say they are. MFA requires additional verification outside of a username and password that could be compromised. MFA will require a code or message reply to be sent to a smartphone or an application, or some type of biometric verification that is much more difficult to obtain by a bad actor. Conditional access can be used to block access or require MFA only when certain conditions are met, such as a geographic location outside of a user's typical login location, an unauthorized app or device, or a device that is viewed to be a high risk due to security patches that have not been applied. Privileged identity management can provide a user with elevated privileges to information under specific time-based parameters that will expire. This access is helpful for providing an auditor or accountant that may only need to view sensitive data to complete a specific job task in a defined window of time. All of these options can help to strengthen security and decrease the vulnerabilities and risk that are a concern regarding access to data. Within the Azure environment, as with any cloud provider, storage accounts will be where the largest percentage of data will be kept and maintained. Azure storage accounts carry a availability service level, or SLA, of 99.99% when utilizing a read access geo-redundant storage tier. This equates to less than 5 minutes per month or less than an hour per year of downtime. If you break down how replication is handled by Azure, the availability is actually much higher. A file that is stored with geo-redundant replication provides 3 local copies within the primary data center and 3 additional copies in a geo-replicated data center. Therefore, if there is a hardware failure locally on a storage array, there are 2 additional local files to access that data. If the data center were to go offline, the geo-replicated data center can be used to access the data. Azure storage accounts by default are encrypted at rest. An administrator would need to consciously turn off encryption to disable this feature, which is highly discouraged. Encryption in transit is considered an option within an Azure storage account. Storage accounts do allow transmission by HTTP and HTTPS by default. It is a good practice to select HTTPS only for these accounts if they're going to store any sensitive data. To avoid unauthorized exposure of data, it is important to turn off anonymous access to storage containers and files. If temporary access to a file is needed, a shared access signature can be created and provided to the users that require access. These access links can be set to expire after a period of time to limit exposure if an unauthorized source comes across the link. Accidental deletion and retention of data should be taken into consideration within your storage account. Azure storage accounts have a soft delete setting that will retain a deleted file for up to a year, and this would allow for recovery of a file upon a user accidentally deleting that file. For retention of data based on business requirements, Azure Blob Storage accounts offer data lifecycle management settings that you can configure. This assists in maintaining the availability of data to users based on when it is needed to be accessed, while also controlling the costs of storage in the cloud subscription. Data that hasn't been accessed for over 30 days can be moved into a cool storage account, and after 90 days, they can be moved to archive storage and maintained there for up to 7 years to meet U.S. federal tax requirements. When utilizing databases within Azure, there are various options for SQL and NoSQL services. We will focus on SQL in the context of this presentation. Azure has 3 deployment methods for SQL. These are SQL Instance, SQL Servers, and Managed SQL Database. These services go from an IaaS instance of SQL to a fully managed SQL database platform, respectively. We are going to highlight the Managed SQL Database. There are multiple options within this service in Azure with different SLAs for each. For databases that are critical to users and customers, Azure SQL Database with the Business Critical or Premium tiers configured as zone redundant deployments have the best availability guarantee of at least 99.995%, which equates to about 2 minutes per month and less than 30 minutes per year of downtime. In addition to the availability SLA, Azure SQL Database Business Critical tier configured with geo-replication has a guarantee recovery point objective or RPO of 5 seconds for 100% of deployed hours and a guarantee recovery time objective or RTO of 30 seconds for 100% of deployment hours. To increase availability and performance of databases, elastic pools can also be deployed. And elastic pools provide an additional way to scale database performance between multiple databases that have dynamic resource requirements. All data in transit from SQL Database is sent through Transport Layer Security, or TLS, to protect any data being delivered. Unlike a storage account, encryption at rest is handled in a different manner within SQL Database. There are multiple options to choose from, therefore encryption is not enabled by default, and it is the organization's responsibility to determine the best encryption methodology to support business and security requirements. Transparent data encryption utilizes centralized key management using Azure Key Vault and can support customer bring your own key scenarios. The always encrypted setting protects sensitive data within specific database columns such as credit card information or other forms of personal identifiable information to avoid exposure. This data would require a certificate or key to be used by the viewer to make the information visible. There are additional security capabilities within SQL Database that we will cover in the next section of this presentation. Azure Advanced Threat Protection is another layer of cloud-based security that leverages Active Directory to identify, detect, and investigate threats, compromised identities, and potential malicious insider actions. ATP monitors user behavior and can profile the activities to find anomalies to possible suspicious activities that may reveal a potential compromise of that user's credentials that may lead to a threat to data and resources. This can assist in reducing the attack surface through protecting user identities and maintaining accessibility to data from users that should have access. We've talked up to this point about accessibility and availability of data. Let's now review how we can maintain the confidentiality, integrity, and compliance of the information that is being accessed. In all organizations, there is sensitive information and data that, if it were to get into the wrong hands, could compromise the financial and reputational welfare of the business. Therefore, it is important to make sure that this sensitive data is properly identified and protected, and data that is confidential is only accessible to authorized individuals or groups to view. The integrity of data requires that data presented is accurate and that it has not been compromised in any way. Having controls in place to monitor and manage both the confidentiality and integrity of data assists in maintaining compliance to security and regulatory standards. Let's discuss some services within Azure and the public cloud that can assist in maintaining data confidentiality, integrity, and compliance. Key Vault in Azure provides a central location to store, access, and manage secrets. A secret can be a password, access signature, encryption key, API key, or certificate that is needed for a user, group, or resource to access a service or data. To maintain the integrity of data, the access and usage of these keys is monitored and can be viewed for anomalies and unauthorized access. The Key Vault protects all of these secrets, and if any secret is compromised, it can be rotated and changed without the need to adjust any applications that rely on the keys for access. Azure Information Protection provides a cloud-based service for data classification and labeling, while also including rights management to protect sensitive data. Having information protection enabled allows documents and emails to be sent to a classification manually, or the service can provide recommendations based on information found in the file, the name of the file, or the subject of the email. An example of this would be a spreadsheet that has a social security number column or an email that has the subject line of financial documents. Azure Rights Management then uses these labels and allows you to assign users and groups to the files and data based on their requirements to access this information. For example, you may allow the overall sales and marketing group to view sales information, but they're not able to edit or delete this information. We previously discussed how SQL Database provides availability SLAs and protects data accessibility through encryption in transit and at rest. SQL Database also provides services that can protect the confidentiality, integrity, and compliance of database information. The first of these is dynamic data masking. This setting helps to limit sensitive data exposure to users that are not supposed to access, such as social security numbers. It will present this information to non-privileged users in a masked format without changing the information within the database. SQL Database services can also be scheduled for regular vulnerability assessments to improve overall data security by discovering and tracking security issues. And to improve data confidentiality, Azure Database has advanced capabilities for data discovery and classification that can be used to classify and label sensitive data within the databases. This setting also provides monitoring and alerting of anomalous access to sensitive data while controlling access to and hardening security of databases that contain highly sensitive data. This also contributes to meeting compliance to privacy and regulatory standards requirements. Azure Policy is a service that allows you to assign rules to govern the Azure subscription and resources. Assigning a policy to a subscription or resource group enforces compliance when creating new resources. They will also audit existing resources against the policy for compliance and allow you to make the adjustments necessary to remediate those resources to comply. Azure Policy feeds governance and compliance information into Azure Security Center, and this information is gathered through assigned policies and initiatives within the subscription or resource groups. Much of the data collected from Azure Logs, Service Logs, and policies are fed into the Azure Security Center dashboard, such as MFA, updates, policy compliance, and role-based access control roles. The Security Center dashboard can be used as a central source for policy and compliance, And Security Center is the overall central source to monitor and manage the best practices of security and compliance controls, and view and adjust the levels of risk and vulnerability to your organization. Now that you know the services in Azure that can assist, how can they be monitored and managed to deliver secure and accessible data? As stated previously, Azure Security Center provides a central location for monitoring and managing your security posture. Security Center provides a number of graphics and tools based on best practices that can assist you with reviewing policy and compliance to regulatory controls, monitor resources to best practice security controls, review network topology and traffic for potential external threats, and monitor and alert using advanced threat analysis and global threat intelligence maps. Let's review how to deliver secure and accessible data through monitoring and management capabilities in Azure Security Center. We've come into our Azure portal and gone to Security Center, and here is where we're going to take a look at how we can bring together the monitoring and management of those controls that we discussed within the presentation. To fully take advantage of the security controls and the monitoring and management within Security Center, it's very important to have a standard subscription enabled for Azure Security Center. What comes with that standard subscription is the regulatory compliance controls, the networking, monitoring, and the threat protection analysis. In addition, for your Azure Active Directory subscription, you should have a premium P2 license, at a minimum premium P1 license, to get the additional privileged identity management and identity protection services that come along with those licenses. When you look at the dashboard here and you look at the regulatory compliance, it's very easy to go in and add a regulatory compliance initiative based on your needs. You can also review the regulatory compliance standards and see how your controls align with those standard controls and best practices. And you can adjust your subscription to meet those controls. So therefore, you know that you have decreased your amount of vulnerability in your environment, as well as if you're audited on that particular compliance standard, you can get your environment in a state that when that audit takes place, it's going to be much less painful to you. In addition to just regulatory compliance, you can come down here to your different resources such as compute. You can look at your SQL databases and your storage accounts and see the best practice recommendations that may be needed to enable and provide proper protection to your environment. The last thing that I'll point out is this overall secure score. And when you go into your subscription and the secure score, you can look and see what your secure score is, and then notice how you can increase that secure score by enabling certain best practice controls within your environment. And following these best practice controls to increase your secure score can help to increase that defense in depth security posture while maintaining controls of security, confidentiality, and the integrity of your data within your environment. This ends this quick overview of how to monitor and manage the security and compliance of your data within Security Center. In this session, we discussed the challenges that organizations face for keeping data secure and accessible. We discussed what to account for when thinking about data accessibility, availability, and the options within the Azure public cloud that can assist. We talked about data confidentiality, integrity, and compliance, and how Azure services provide options to protect sensitive data and maintain a secure and compliant environment. And finally, we covered how to bring these services together to deliver and manage a secure and accessible data environment to users. Thank you very much. Please feel free to reach out and connect with me at the social media links provided on this slide. Have a great day.